Okay, it's 18:05. I think we can start this session now. So good evening, everybody, once again. My name is Mariah Tembo, and I'm an entrepreneurship associate here at Bongo Hive. So today is a very exciting session. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar, which is Startup to LuSE, the .com Zambia story with Mawano Kambeu. So this evening, we're actually honored to be joined by Mawano Kambeu, who is the founder and CEO of Dot Com Zambia. And guiding us through the session, we also have Kawela Malupande, who is the Growth and Partnerships Manager here at Bongo Hive as well. So Kawela, at this point, I don't want to waste too much time. I think you can take it up from here.
Thanks so much, Mariah. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this exciting session on the fireside chats. For those that do not know me, again, my name is Kawela Malupande, and I'm the manager for growth and partnerships at Bongo Hive. I can see 50 messages in the chat. Are those questions already? If there are questions, please hold up. Time will come for questions, but please let us know where you're joining us from. And if you're just learning or knowing about Bongo Hive for the first time, we are a technology and innovation hub, and we work with startups, corporates, and our overall mission is to unlock Africa's economic potential through technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And this conversation really adds to that. I'm super excited about this, and we have quite a unique guest. Our guest today is Mawano Kambeu, who is the founder and managing director of Dot Com Zambia, which is a Zambian tech company that specializes in providing ICT solutions that drive efficiency in revenue collection systems and business intelligence for both public and private sector organizations. Currently, we're at quite an interesting time, and I think the founders was pretty excited about this. So .com Zambia is currently poised to make history as the first ever company to complete a public listing on the Lusaka Stock Exchange alternative market, a market that has had no participation since it was created, I would like to believe. And the IPO was announced in early September, and we're just currently waiting for final regulatory clearance. Welcome, Mawano, and excited to have you.
Thank you very much. Good evening to you, to Maria, and I think to everyone that has taken time out of their schedules to join us today. And you are right; it is a very exciting time. So I'm really honored to be here and to be given the opportunity to share my story and some of the things that we're going to be working on going forward.
Brilliant. And for those in our community that are meeting you for the first time, I would really like to just get a proper introduction from you. Before you became an entrepreneur, I think many people would even like to know who Mawano is, right? In fact, who Mawano was before he became an entrepreneur, because many of the audience might know you as the founder that you are today. So who's that person? Can you just take us back a bit?
Absolutely. It's funny. It's an interesting question because obviously in building up to the IPO, there are a lot of questions of who's the man behind the company. And that's when you start to realize just how far back everything goes. The fact that my entrepreneurship journey, even with .com Zambia, is 19, it's going on 19 years now. And I think that gets lost a little bit. And I remember, there's a section where I'm talking about how I met the chairman. I actually met him at a Bongo Hive event back in 2013. A gentleman, I think it was Mr. Chavala Kaunda. I met him at one of your events. It was a networking event. We got to talking. I started to realize that I needed him as a mentor, and I officially made him an advisor. And later on, he is now chairman of the board. So I think this is also a Bongo Hive story, I think, to a certain degree. But I think to fill in the dots too, I think people sort of know me as a bit of a tech entrepreneur, and they get a little bit surprised when I tell them that my background is actually not tech. It's actually capital markets. And so just to get, to sort of give everyone a bit of a Cliff Note overview, I did my secondary school in Kitwe. So I am actually Kitwe born and bred. I moved to the US immediately after school, and through various circumstances, I ended up in the mailroom of a large financial company. That large financial company is where I then spend the next 10 years of my career, working my way up from the mailroom to customer service, From customer service, I worked operations management. From operations management, I was in sales. And then from sales, I became sort of the head of investment marketing and strategy, if you will. And in the interim, I was sort of, Dot Com Zambia had started, so it was something that I was doing sort of on both ends, if you will, until I made the decision that I want to come back to Zambia. I want to focus on Dot Com Zambia full time. And I ended up making that move, and the rest is history. But I think for everyone on the call, my background is actually, even from an education perspective, I have an undergraduate degree in marketing, and I have an MBA in finance, and I did all of that in the US.
Thanks so much, Mawano. Glad to know that you're from Kopala Nation. So I'm proudly born and raised in Quito as well, which is pretty cool. I wanted to find out, so quite a journey, but at what point, like what was that pivotal moment that made you decide, like, okay, I think entrepreneurship is a path for me, and I'm going to start building out a tech company? Because talking 19 years back, the ecosystem didn't look like it is today, right? Very few people had smartphones, but you really decided to go on and build a tech company at the time. So what was that pivotal moment?
Yeah, no. So, you always say that somehow where you end up sometimes happens by accident. We're going back to the year 2006, and I had just come on holiday. I moved to the US, spent a number of years, and I remember I saved up quite a bit for that first holiday. And I came back, and I remember a couple of things happened that sort of got me thinking. The first was when I was coming back, I came back with tons of stuff. It was a person telling, oh, you're flying back, get this thing off Amazon for me, and so you're now coming back with, katundu full of things. And then after I had left on holiday, I got a phone call from someone saying, hey, look, there's some people that would like you to buy some things online for them. And it just turned out that it happened to be, at the time, I didn't know it then. It was only when I was introduced, I found out it was Blockbuster Video. And they were like, look, there's some orders, some merchandise that we need to order. We can't seem to find them anywhere, but we know they're available online. Can you help facilitate that? And that was basically around the year 2006. But I think where the strategic wheel started to turn is, like any entrepreneur, I started to ask myself, okay, what problem exactly am I solving? And why are these people coming to me for this particular service? And it turned out to really be a couple of answers. And I'm glad that you brought up that it was a very different tech environment. And I think depending on your age, sometimes you take it for granted what was happening in 2006. So it was basically one of two things. One, it was that they wanted things that were not available in Zambia. And this was when Manda Hill was the only shopping mall in the country back then. A few others were popping up, but it was generally around, we want things that are not available in the country, but we know they're available online. The other challenge that a lot of people were running into is that they did not have the ability to pay. Bank cards, there was no mobile money back then. Banks were not issuing bank cards that were like Visa enabled. You couldn't get access to PayPal. So in a way, I became the solution to that. And so a lot for me was like, okay, how do I make this work? How do I build the operational systems? How do I understand shipping and logistics? How am I going to handle the customs aspect on the other side? So once all of those things started to fall in place and words started to get around, that was effectively how Dot Com Zambia started. It was basically, we were doing e-commerce facilitation.
Brilliant. And so for a non-tech founder, so we have many non-tech founders, right? And I'm thinking to myself, so I've got no idea. Well, I'd like to assume you had some idea or context of how technology worked, right? Like, what did that look like? Were you running to go and find a CTO? Were you trying to now learn to build this thing yourself? What did that look like at the time?
Actually, in the early days, and I think this is one of the reasons I'm very proud of how the ecosystem has evolved. Back then, if you wanted to do anything tech oriented, you were looking for developers in India. I even remember, I spent some time in India, and these were, even to get basic things done and get basic systems up and running. But I think and I think the big takeaway I'd probably leave for a lot of folks, and even to the developers in the room, I do not have a tech background. Obviously, because of my profession, I'm probably more well versed than the average person now when it comes to tech. But one of the things that I would be able to claim, especially as this phone call comes on, is how I designed particular systems or particular solutions. And people will be thinking, but you're not a tech. How did you do that? And I think what you always have to remember, is that it's not technically about the tech itself. It's actually about the business process. If you think about any solution that you want to provide in any business that you do, it's technically a business process that you are solving. You're also asking yourself, what's my value proposition? What are the standard operating procedures I need to keep in mind? How should this work? And if you are well versed enough in sort of understanding sort of the business you want to build, that is actually the solution. Then it comes down to, who do I now need to help me build that? And that is where now you start to bring in your tech engineers. If you're not well versed in accounting, that's where you bring in your accountants. And I think ultimately that's how it's become full circle. And that is how I can sort of demystify this aspect of, well, how someone, who comes from a financial background running a tech company. And I think ultimately it comes down to what every, business mission has, which is, what problem am I solving? And, and just also speaking of the evolution of tech, I mean, I think even the work, Bongo Hive, I think a lot of the work you're overseeing, 19 years ago, that would have been impossible to think about. But it also shows that even within our company, we run our own internal technology department overseen by a CTO, building a lot of the solutions that we are working on today. And I think that has been the evolution over the years.
Tell me, so when I look at your revenue today, right, and I was just looking at the stats, you are at about $20 million, right?
Yes.
And I think that should be higher this year.
Yeah.
But what did that look like 19 years? Let's go back 19 years ago, right?
Yeah.
When you had your first paying customer. I'd like to learn what that story looked like.
Wow. All right. So, like any business, your story is a little bit loaded, because I think when it comes to the revenue, there's certainly been ups and downs. But I do remember my first paying, customer, and that was actually Blockbuster Video, as I mentioned. And oddly enough, because of the process I'm going through and thinking about memory lane, I actually reached out to the owner of the gentleman that owned the Blockbuster Video franchises back then. I think his name was Jason Randy. They ran the Debonaires over in Kablonga Steers. And I remember when he gave me the first order, it was $4,000. And I was for a lack of better word, I was a broke student. So you're asking me to do an order for $4,000. I'm thinking, where the hell am I going to get $4,000 or however much of money I need just to get this up and running? And it took a little bit of convincing, but ultimately he ended up paying me in advance. So they actually ended up paying me the $4,000 in advance. And that was sort of like my seed money, if you will, to get the business started. So that original e-commerce business sort of started with that first $4,000. And by 2012, I think I had grown it to about $1 million in revenue. Now, when we're talking fintech, we always have to be careful, revenue versus profits. And I think everyone has to look at that. But it was a business that I began to scale, and it did grow to about $1 million by the time I was saying, you know what, I need to focus on this full time. But what started to happen after that is the dynamics of the business started to change as Zambia began to change. So, for example, with the way the retail market landscape changed here, shopping malls, where the goods were coming in from, companies like Samsung coming in directly into the company, what we started to notice is we were starting to get pushed towards being more of a shipping and handling company, not an order processing company. So when I looked at the business back then, my revenues were high because I was technically processing the order for everyone. So if someone wanted to buy a phone for $1,000, they would send me the $1,000. I would charge them a processing fee to process that transaction and a shipping fee. In later years, it became more of the shipping fee, but that was ultimately how sort of the first version of .com Zambia started and how it grew to the size that it grew to. before we sort of moved into the ginormous numbers that you prefaced today. But those were certainly the early years.
I think you've touched on something that I'd like you to even further double click on, which is, I think your story then tells the story of you being customer funded as opposed to first looking out for investment from investors and going out there. What's your perspective, especially on other entrepreneurs that are starting out? Would you encourage them to continue pursuing being customer funded, or is it advisable for them to just
No.
straight on go on and
So, wow. So when I think about the history of Dot Com Zambia, I've been funded. You know, when the textbooks talk about all the different ways that one can get funded, I have gone through it. I have won grants. I have gotten loans. I have borrowed from friends, luckily paid them back. You know, I've also gotten, doing it as a side job. So I've certainly gone through that process. But here's what I will say. It seems that no matter what environment we are in, it always seems to be that the number one issue entrepreneurs always talk about is capital. The requirement for capital. That has not changed. When I go to entrepreneurship events today, I go to the same ones 10, 12 years ago. It was always the fight for capital. Now, I was in the financial markets, and I think what I would say to people is, look, at the end of the day, we can keep whining about, capital is hard to find, but that's the reality of it. Capital is selective. The only thing you can ask yourself is, do I understand what I need to do to attract capital, and how do I position my business strong enough to attract it? So what I knew is when I started back in 2006, I was customer funded. But when you're customer funded and you're making very low margins, you can only do so much, I think, in terms of trying to grow. So even back then, I couldn't turn around and say, you know what, I want to spend $20,000 building infrastructure. I just didn't have that sort of margin. So what I did is, I remember the first friend I borrowed money from gave me a $4,000 loan. I was making a little bit money, so I was able to service that loan. And please, anyone on this call, please pay your debt. I have lost so many friends. They've borrowed, never paid me back. At least I could say I did pay my friend back. I got another loan for about $10,000. And right off the bat, the one thing that I was very careful about was governance and keeping records. So what started to happen is, after I built a 3-year track record, I was actually able to get my first formal business loan. And I sort of built from there. And I think if anyone has looked at, our history as well, 2014, I was doing quite a lot of pitching for a lot of the projects that I was working on. And, I won, I remember I went to Morocco and pitched at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. I got about a $10,000 grant from there. I went to Harvard University and pitched in one of their New Ventures Africa competition, won first prize in that, and I got a $15,000 grant from Harvard. I've gotten money from angel investors, from family. But where it really started to change was a bank, for example. A bank will only give you money. First of all, banks will give you money when you don't need it. That's the weird thing. When you don't need money, a bank is always willing to give you money. So they're willing to give me money today, but back then they're problematic. But I think what we have to remember is that especially banks in Zambia, they will give you money based on 2 factors: the amount of collateral you can put up, or if you've built up a bit of a track record, what your cash flows look like. And they come up with a formula. But what I knew is that for the level of ambition that I wanted to get to, those would just not cut it. And that was where venture capital investing came in. I was able to get $500,000 from Kukula Capital and E-Ventures out of the Netherlands. And I remember that period. It was a 2-year period of trying to look for investors. It was not easy, especially because Zambia, for many venture capital, Zambia was not sort of top of their list. They want to put money in South Africa, in Kenya, in Nigeria, Ghana, and sort of Egypt. But Zambia was a little bit difficult. So I remember that I must have talked to over 100 investors, and I did end up getting investments. But the secret that I can now tell, and I've now told them, they were the only 2. So I got 98 no's, and only 2 of them actually said, we are willing to invest in you. And then obviously we'll talk about the IPO later, but obviously there are reasons why we are looking at an IPO. But I think the big takeaway from the question that you've asked is, look, no one's going to give you capital. not easily. Everyone has different stories as to how they raised capital. Some might, do it out of their own savings. If you're fortunate enough, you might have families that might back you. You might have customers that might be willing to advance you if you've got a very strong value proposition. But all I can say is the business of money is hard, especially when you are a startup. When you achieve a little bit of success, it does become easier. It certainly has become easier for us over the years, but I can tell you it was definitely very difficult, especially in the early years.
Quite insightful. You're dropping gems, Mawano. I love it. And I would like us to dive deeper into the funding journey. But
Yeah.
let's take a step back on the customer side as well. I think I did mention, and I think you acknowledged as well, the fact that you were in an ecosystem where tech wasn't a thing, right? So
Yes.
I'd like to believe and guess that there was some level of education that needed to go into maybe your customer, or maybe it didn't happen. I'd just like to learn how you went on educating your customers about this tech platform that you were building, the e-commerce platform. Because even at the time, I'd like to believe they were scammers, right? People were scared of losing their money. So how did you navigate that space to just make sure that
No.
customers trusted you and the product?
No, that's a great question. And to be honest with you, I think whenever you are innovating and doing something new, education becomes a centerpiece of what it was we were doing. I mean, I even remember the early years. I remember one year we had financial difficulty because there were a lot of people that would make an online order, claim, oh no, we don't trust you. How do we know it's not a scam? So we would front the order. The order then arrives. You then tell the customer pay. They're like, oh, you guys are for real. Actually, I don't have the money to pay, And I remember that, we had to find a bit of a balance between how do you fulfill an order and how do you not. I even remember when we tried to do, I think the way to look at it is we tried to build the Amazon of Zambia. The amount of education, it got a little bit frustrating because the amount of we were spending more time educating people than we were actually running the business, just because it was so unknown. And one of the things that I've learned very early on is do not assume people know. And even when we're doing something, keep it simple. Even when we think about naming, we want to name a product. We want to make sure. So if we say electronic tolling, e-toll, the name should be in that, not something fancy that we have to explain. Things like that matter. That also happened, I think, when we moved to later years. One of the things I think a lot of people might remember us is we worked on a bus ticketing project. And I even remember with that project, this, we could probably spend the next 2 hours talking about what happened with, with sort of bus ticketing. But the cliff note that I will give you is if everyone thinks about what they do, and this still happened to me a couple of weeks back. I had to take a relative. They were going from Lusaka to Solwezi. We still had to go on Friday to buy the ticket, drive to Intercity, buy the ticket, come back home, Saturday morning, drive them back to Intercity. Now, that's frustrating to everyone, and I think it would make sense. And if you do your market research, everyone would tell you that it's frustrating. And if you tell them that, you know what, I could give you a better method to do this. The bus companies don't want to pay me, but if I charged you 5 kwacha, are you willing to pay? And the answer would probably be yes. And that was a lot of why we then went about to say, let's go about doing bus ticketing. But I remember when it began, there was so much trepidation from users and the education. The only people that were comfortable with it was people going to Livingston from outside the country, because I think the whole e-commerce thing was second nature to them. And I remember it got so bad that even from an operational perspective, what we had to do is when a bus ticket was purchased, we literally had to send someone to Intercity to literally go and wait just to make sure the operating process was clear. So when you speak about education and whatnot, believe me, I have been through it in every sort of way. I mean, I could even take you to an example more recently when we started working on electronic tolling. And I remember this was Zambeef, and I'm trying to get Zambeef to come in and be our electronic tolling customer. And I'm going to their farm in Chisamba, the Huntley farm. And I remember one day they're like, we want to meet you at the toll plaza, And I think they did that for 2 reasons. One, they wanted to see, is this guy for real? Will the people at the toll plaza actually recognize him? And we want to see that, we want him himself to show us how this system is working. So that's the level of education you have to deal with. And look, it requires a bit of patience, but you have to remember that you cannot get to where you are without the customer. So it's something. And so for me, and everyone in our organization knows this, if they want to see me annoyed, you want to see me angry, and I rarely get angry, is make one of our customers angry. Upset them. Don't give them great service, because I know how hard it is to get a customer. And so you must treat them right, and you must be patient, and you must go through this process of educating them, showing them the value proposition, and getting them loyal to you and to your product.
I'm sure every entrepreneur that's trying to build out an innovative product can relate with that. You are getting in a space, especially because you're trying to innovate. Most likely, there's a lot of education that you will be doing for your customer. Speaking to the bus story, I mean, it's always frustrating at Intercity. And besides just the drive back and forth, there's people always that will come around you. These guys that are trying to get, I don't know, they're trying to sell you a wrong bus ticket. You're trying to go to Livingstone, you find yourself on a Solwezi bus or going to Eastern Province. So it's really wild and crazy.
Well, it's funny that years later, I mean, we're talking about, 10 years ago, but the problem is still there today, meaning that we didn't solve it. The question becomes, how does it get solved? And there is opportunity. Even if you do the numbers, how many buses are leaving Intercity? How many seats are there? If you start, and I remember when we did the mathematics, it was crazy. It was like we only had to convert 10%. Something was some low number like that. It was such a low hurdle rate that it was a no-brainer that you had to try it, because you just said, if we can convert X number of travelers a day to something electronic, we could be killing it.
So why isn't the customer or the bus operator adopting this, or the particular user? Like, what's the challenge? Sorry to dwell on this too much.
Oh, well, that's a complex answer. One, if I look back now, what would I do differently? One, we should never have tried to change the industry ourselves. We should have been more in the background, pushing the bus operators themselves to push the solution. That was certainly one particular challenge. Two, you had vested interest. You had employees at bus stations that just did not want to see tech, and they did everything in their power to sabotage what was happening. And I think the third area was the industry itself was not very formal. So if you sort of go in with a corporate boardroom style, you were going to have, you're going to have challenges. And also, I think the fourth reason was, at that time, the payment methods were not as advanced. We had not moved along in terms of digital payments, mobile money penetration as we have now. So I think it was right product, wrong time, and slightly wrong strategy. Could it be done now? Perhaps. And, maybe someone on this call could say, there's opportunity, let me jump at it. Absolutely. But like anything, it will require work. But look, nothing comes easy. But I think those would probably be my analysis of where that wrong. And look, and I think with everything, as any good, we've had our setbacks. That was one of them. But what you do is you learn from them, and you make it stronger, and you know what to look out for in the next iteration.
Brilliant. So you've talked about the Amazon of Zambia. We've talked about the bus ticketing. So there has been quite a number of points, I think, of failure and learning. But were there any key moments that you think almost ended the company? Or completely almost made you change the direction?
Yeah, actually, it was funny enough. It happened after I got funding, the $500,000. And $500,000 is a lot of money until it's not a lot of money. That's sort of the weird phrase that I would sort of put out there. And what happened was, we got the investment in 2015. And who remembers what the kwacha was trading at in 2015? If anyone can even just roughly remember, or just put it on the chat room, this will sort of tee up the story, if you will. If you can remember what the kwacha was trading at, this was early 2015. So what I'm saying is, we got $500,000, and it was moved into kwacha because we were operating in kwacha. In fact, it was not even 7 to 9, it was 5. It was under 5. I know it might seem a long time ago, but it was actually trading at under 5. Yeah, actually someone has got it. It was 5 kwacha to the dollar, you know? So that investment came in, and all of a sudden, right off the bat, the currency starts to free fall, making the kwacha value of what we had received as an investment, it basically halved it and just slashed it, over a short period of time. The other challenge that we ran, well, the other two challenges we ran into, and I remember this because it changed how I would run the company later on, is when you get, when you receive venture capital, you give them board seats and you sit down and you start to think about how you're going to now run the organization. Now, we were a very small organization, and I think one of the things that we did fairly quickly is we expanded way too quickly. It was every function was thrown in. Oh, you need a chief financial officer. You now need a chief market. You need a marketing department. You need this. You need that. And all of that starts to cost money. So even right early on, when I started to look at how much cash we were burning, I knew right off the bat that we were in trouble. I think I maybe took 1 or 2 salaries until I'm like, I've got to stabilize this before I can get back on the payroll. And from there, obviously, we had pumped in quite a bit of money on the bus ticketing project. And yeah, we just started to burn cash. And it got to the point where I could see that the money we had been funded with was starting to run out. At that point, I had done quite well for myself in my America days when I was on Wall Street. And I remember I'd come back to Zambia and I'd structured my things in a way where I'm like, even if I don't work for the next couple of years, I can be an entrepreneur and I should be okay as long as I keep things very tight. We started to burn money. I mean, I started to pay salaries out of my pocket. I started defaulting on loans that I'd gotten for the company. I used up my pension plan at the time. So it did become very, 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 very dicey. And I remember there was quite a bit of back and forth where Kukula Capital and E-Ventures had a decision because literally the money had run out. And so they had a decision to make. Are we, and look, and, they basically had to decide, are we going to write this off as an investment and pull the plug and walk away? Or are we going to pump more money back into it? And at the time, what you'd have to remember, their mindset is, they had seen this was not happening in isolation. They were getting monthly reports. We were having board meetings. I was telling them what my plan B, my plan C, what my plan D were. So I think they knew all of these things. And I think fortunately for me, yeah, they turned around and said, okay, no, we need to pump more money back into this. There's some things that he's working on that he did. And I also remember one of the things that I think really gets me emotional is they did not know how bad of a financial situation I was in. And so they actually turned around and paid, said, here's some money to help you sort out. No, it won't take away your issues, but at least, your property is being foreclosed on, you're in court. At least it will allow you to stabilize some things. So around 2017, yeah, we were definitely on very sketchy grounds. And I remember a couple of things that happened after that period. I remember the people at the Kukula offices started to call me Lazarus or Valazo. So every time they saw me, they were like, we thought .com was dead. How are you back? And they started calling me, Lazarus. And, there was, and then the other thing is, I remember a friend of mine would be like, Iwe, how do you lose investors $500,000? And what do? They give you more money. What sort of witchcraft is this? Or what stories, what sweet talk are you telling them? No, there was no sweet talk. I think all they saw was grit and determination. And I think they backed me. And obviously now in hindsight, we can talk about it. They obviously ended up making the best decision they ever could by keeping the company afloat and not walking away.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Valazo. We appreciate that story. I'd like to find out how you kept 3 stakeholders in the business motivated through this difficult time, right? Because it's not just the investors. You have your investors, but you have your employees as well. Things are bad, but your employees as well need to stay motivated and believe in the vision of the company. And the third one as well, I'd like you to touch on is yourself as the founder. What kept you motivated? What was that story that you kept telling yourself to keep going?
So we'll approach it from three perspectives. The employee one was a tough one. I even remember, and even when people ask me, what's always hard for you? And I remember what was hard for me, especially in the early years, was always hiring people is always the best thing. That's the best feeling. I think 3 months ago, I think we were about 13 employees. Now, because of things happening, we're now sitting at 38 employees. But very different situation, very different from where we were, back then. I think now the revenue sort of justifies the numbers, if you will. But I remember for the employees, it was very tough. So what ended up happening, two things began to happen. The original e-commerce business, the Dot Com Zambia business that we talked about, what we did is that was still around, but it was quite hard running two types of business. On one hand, you're running a technology business. On the other hand, you're running an e-commerce business. I was stretched thin. So one of the early decisions we made around about that time, after we sort of, was to say, you know what, the e-commerce business is a good business for a couple of people. It's not a friendly investor scalable business. So what we told the senior employees of that company, go and start your own company and we will sell you this business for 1 kwacha. Okay, just go and do it. And that was what they did. I think it's called Click and Connect. Alfred Malambo was actually one of my first employees in 2006. He's now the owner and director of that. And so that was sort of how we spun off the e-commerce division. And then with the technology, we were down to basically 4 people. It was me and 3 developers and 3 engineers. And we continued working on some of the solutions that we were working on. And remember what I said in the very beginning about we hired quite a lot. Now I did the complete opposite. Now I said, you know what? I am going to be the sales guy, the ops person in there. When we make a bit of money, I can look at our financials and I can say, I can now hire this person. Then I will start adding on. And so even now, when we talk about we went from 14 people to 38. I think we're making about 1.2 million kwacha in profit every month. So if you're going to add on a few employees, they're comfortably cushioned into the business. Very different from 2014 when we were overstaffed, but the revenue had not come in. So I sort of went back to lean mode. And so that sort of began to happen. On the investor side, I think as I sort of touched on this, what happens is when you've got good governance, there's transparency around what's happening in the business. One of the things that I was very sure to do is, one, every month they're getting the management accounts from us, and they're getting a manager commentary from myself. We're having board meetings every quarter. So they always knew what was going on in the business. And at the board meeting, they always knew how my mind worked, how hard I was working, what we were trying to do. And I think what that did is, and I think ultimately their decision to invest, even in the beginning and even in 2017, was based on me as an individual. I think it was their faith in me to say, you know what? This guy's going to move mountains. He's not going to give up. He's going to keep going. Let's back him. And, they ultimately did. But they were also very helpful as well. They played a key role in trying to move things forward. As for myself, I think the key thing that I would take away from people is you're hearing a story that's 19 years old, and it has not been easy. If I sat here and told all of you that it's been rosy, everything worked out, no, it's not. I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, every entrepreneur, one of the things you've got to deal with is burnout, especially when things are not going well, what that does to your mental health. And one of the things I ultimately advocate for is make sure everything you do is balanced. Unfortunately, sometimes there's no substitute when you're deep in the trenches, but just try and keep that in mind. Obviously, I have the luxury now of being able to say I can get help. I can get, it doesn't have to be on me anymore. In fact, one of the most exciting things that have happened today that we announced is we have a new chief financial and operating officer. I think Chilufia Kangwa, very seasoned person that I've worked with for a couple of years. So she's coming in and she will actually take over the day-to-day running of .com Zambia, especially as we transition, allowing me to focus more on the strategy side. Unfortunately, those are things that sort of only happen as you start to grow and achieve a certain level of success. But I think for anyone deep in the trenches, what kept me going, I just didn't want to fail. And I think what probably to tee up the last of your question, one of the things that I always did is not everything is going to work perfectly. But I think what I always had is I always knew what plan A was going to be, plan B, plan C, plan D. So I think for me was, when was I going to give up? When we got to plan G. After we tried A, B, C, D, you get to G, it's not working. Then I could say, you know what, I've tried everything and I've left it on the table. And I think the other thing was, there was a formula that was given to me when I was in sales in the US. And this is a formula I share with my sales staff. It's a formula that I will share with everyone on this chat, but it's activity times frequency equals results. The more you do something, the more often you do it, the more results you're going to get. Now, it's a sales tool, but it applies to everything that you do. And if you think about it, I actually told where that example came to mind. When I was trying to get venture capital investing, I talked to about 100 people. That was my activity. The result I got was eventually 2 people. Now, if you do an activity and it fails, and after 3 you give up, then what's the point? But you've got to balance that with that phrase that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and getting the same result. So even as you're doing your activity, you tweak it. Okay, what have I done now? That's not quite working. All right, let me adjust it. Let me make it better. This client did not give me business. This is how I'm going to make my value proposition stronger. So you have to be constantly learning and changing, the strength of that activity that you are doing, in addition to how often you do it. Because I know there are people that work hard on this call, and sometimes it feels like, the hard work is just not enough. So you got to back that up with quality activity.
Listen to you, Mawano. It sounds like you weren't going to stop at plan G. You're probably going to push it all the way to the last letter in the alphabet. If you're done, you move to the Chinese characters.
I would like to think that was the case. I'm glad I didn't have to get to plan G. And to be quite honest, I think the way we talk about plan B, plan C now is a little bit different, but that's because it's a very different company in a very different position. But but certainly, that was really and I think the board and the investors saw that look at him fighting. He's got a plan D, he's got a plan E. Let's see this out. If that doesn't work, then we can say at least we tried.
So from the e-commerce platform, I'd like us to now fast forward to where we are today, right? So
yep.
How is what problem do you currently now solve for your customers? Problem or problems? And what does Dot Com Zambia look like right now?
Absolutely. So right now, Dot Com Zambia is the largest e-toll manager in Zambia. So when you think about electronic tolling and how clients and individuals that are using the electronic tolling system to pass through the toll plazas, we are the largest manager there. And how that value proposition began was basically back in 2017. And interestingly enough, it was a bit of a twofold problem that we had to solve. So if anyone can remember 2017, if you drove through a toll plaza in Zambia, there was only one way you could pay. That was by cash. That was it. Government started collecting tolls, and the only way you could pay was cash. And I think that was the culture and the ecosystem at the time. Now you can just start to imagine the problems that created. And I even remember one particular situation. So if you just think of this situation, you're a transporter and you've got 450 trucks. How are you going to manage that? That quickly became the frustration. And, and I remember what happened at the time is the National Road Fund Agency started to say, okay, people are beginning to make noise here. We've only got 3 toll plazas, not the 31 we have today. There were only 3 back then. But it's quite clear that there's a problem here. How do we solve it? And I remember what they did. They put a call out to pretty much everyone. They wrote to the banks. They wrote to all the tech companies. They wrote to the telcos. They wrote to all the foreign development, and they started to say, look, this is the problem that we have. Let's solve it. And very quickly, it became apparent. And I'm looking at this, I'm saying, how come no one's got a solution for this? Or no one's got the right solution for this. So the solutions that started to come in were a little bit crazy. So, if you think, for those of you who've traveled outside of Zambia and have seen those very big, glamorous toll plazas where you don't even stop, you just drive your car right through, people like that came into the country. They were talking about, we can build this system for you. It will be $2 million a lane. that already became problematic. The banks at the time saying, okay, we can do this, but then they quickly got reminded that banks are only responsible for moving money from A to B. If you do tolling, there's infrastructure, there's data that you have to curate. You can't just look at a transaction and say, there's 20 kwacha. So all of a sudden, they're not in the running. So all of a sudden, I'm there, and now I'm explaining that, you know what, I can build this solution. This is how I'm going to do it. These are how, the standard operating procedures are going to work. If we're thinking about a tech solution, here's the architect. And I started to map all of that out. And I remember the NRFA were quickly very like, oh my goodness, he's the only one that's making sense. And not only that, unlike developers outside of Zambia, he actually understands the technological limitations, that these plazas are in the middle of nowhere. They've got no network. There's no fact, because, I remember companies were coming in and saying, no, we've got to put like a satellite, on top of your booth, to make it work. This was 2017. So, so that was effectively it. It just happened to be like, you start asking yourself and saying, am I really the smartest guy in the room? Am I really the only one that's got this figured out? And it turned out that I was. And I remember we gave them a couple of different options to now say, okay, here, we can do it like that. And they said, okay, can you do like a point of sale system? Can you do smart cards? And here's the happy ending with what happened. The bus ticketing system that we had built and had been developing, that was actually what we recycled for electronic tolling. So the handheld devices that the conductors were using, that was what we repurposed for tolling. The smart cards were loyalty cards for frequent travelers. How do you know if a bus passenger is traveling more than once? So I actually took that infrastructure, started repurposing it for tolling, and rewrote the whole operation cycle. This is how it worked. And so we were like, okay. So then they're like, okay, come, show us how it works. Start running a demo. And then what started happening is they had passed a statutory instrument at the time to say, okay, if you want to be a toll distributor, toll manager, you can go, you can apply. You can buy tolls from us at a discount, and you can now start selling it to your clients. And again, we started to build solutions. That was how I could go to a Zambeef and say to them, remember that issue where you've got to go to the bank and bring this whole bunch of cash back to your office, start giving every individual driver, wait for the receipts. I have a system that will eliminate all of that for you. And that was effectively how tolling began, on two sides. Now, over time, what we said is we wanted to be a toll manager. We don't want to be a system provider. We'll integrate into it. But you can, build that out. We've shown you how to do it. We're going to focus on this. And that was how basically we started something from zero. Our revenue was 17 million kwacha that was in 2017. We then did 38 million kwacha, and we make about 4% of those numbers. That was what we did. Fast forward to last year, 530 million. This year, we're going to do 620 million. Next year, because of the budget, just because of the budget, not because of the publicity of the IPO, me now having a sales team, we're going to do over 800 million kwacha in revenue. We have well over 300 customers, everyone from Zambeef, ShopRite. I remember Mr. Bota going to go pitch him. And I think what I would say to the people on the call is I remember when I first began in this, I went to Kapiri and I spent 3 days at a weighbridge just watching traffic go by, just trying to understand what was going on. Then I started going door to door, because sometimes we have this tendency of, I'm only going to get business if so-and-so introduced me, or if my uncle buys a connection. People did say no to me, but remember that formula that I gave you, activity times frequency equals sales. That was it. I was everywhere. Industrial area, I'm off to Ndola, knocking on this door. And let me also say there were some wonderful people that I met. I think when people see you, that this is a guy trying hard, they want to support you. I remember one particular customer, after, I got them on board, they're like, come to dinner with me. I want to introduce you to a couple of people. He introduced me to Trade Kings. Oh, tell them about your ETO solution. Get them. Oh, look at that company over there. I mean, that was the sort of love and response that I was getting. And that was effectively how the whole thing just sort of blew up, if you will. And that is why now today we can sort of make that claim that we are the biggest ETO company in the country. That was effectively how that started. When the private toll plazas came on board, they also did the same thing. They just made an announcement in the news that we're going to start tolling. That was up by Kasumbalesa. And we're only going to collect by cash. And I remember very soon they started getting an uproar. Who collects cash in this day and age? And I remember they called me up. And I remember this developed. Now, obviously, I know the toll system in and out because we developed it. And I remember in 2 weeks, we built a whole new toll system to go at the private toll plazas. So right now we are operating at both the government operated toll plazas and the private toll plazas as well, because we basically run their e-toll system. And this is a bit of a tagline, but we have about 8 competitors. 2 of those competitors have borrowed our system, use our system, and they pay us a royalty. So even our own competitors, technically we make money, they make money, but you got to spread out the love, is the way that I look at it. But that was effectively how we got to where we are now. Now, there are other things we are thinking about going forward, and we do have other intellectual property that we are working on. It's a very different environment from how we do it today, from how it was when you're a bit strong, but yeah, that's effectively how we became where we are today and how we stand to what we're going to do tomorrow.
Being a moderator, I was so invested listening, I forgot I'm the moderator because I just love your story. That was really brilliant.
I could see the questions blowing up. They're very good questions. I see people wanting me to give us our secret sauce. You are right. I did see that technical questions. Yeah. What they do is it is API oriented. It depends on the customer that we're using with. Not to get into the weeds. I remember one of our competitors, they have an API relationship. They love the way we sort of run our data and sort out the toll data. And so they wanted that. So they get, so they feed the transactions feed into our system. There's a way our black box makes heads and tails of all of that. And there's an API that sends it back to them. Others just license our way of managing clients. So it's different agreements.
I love that, Mawano. And looking back, at the time that you were building the bus ticketing stuff, like the e-commerce, like you had no idea everything would connect, right? But you can see how it's been a very perfect journey. Yeah.
Look, I've been working on a bio. It's been very emotional working on this, on a mini bio, because a lot of questions are coming about, because a lot of people have been asking, Dot Com Zambia, my goodness, like, where have you guys been? Now you're doing an IPO. Weren't you doing like e-commerce or bus ticketing years back? And so in connecting the dots, I think the one thing that I can say I cannot make any rhyme or reason to why things worked out the way that they did. I'm very religious. I don't like to sort of press that on people, but I know behind the scenes very quietly, when you're up, you pray. And there's just been situations where I just cannot explain it. You're stuck. You're saying, look, this must be the end. And, God opens up a way, including the very story that I'm telling you about now. Like, who would have known that is what that turned into? But I think only God knew. And so I cannot give people on this a formula to say, follow this and you will do the same thing, because even I can't explain it. All I can do is make the most of it, but also remember the responsibility I have, So even, for example, part of doing the IPO, I know a lot of that was driven around national development, showing other entrepreneurs, like, this is what's possible. Also just my philosophy on how I treat employees and the people around me. And now you just never forget. You never forget what gets you there. And so those are grounded in how I do things, because sometimes you look at it, or even just how kind people were. That client I'm talking about did not have to take me to dinner to say, I'm going to introduce you to 5 more customers that's going to help your business grow. Stories like that, there's no rhyme or reason. There's no business logic to it. Maybe they just think, hey, look, this is a good guy, his heart's in the right place, we will back him. If it's that, then I'm thankful for that.
And so many of our in our audience are startups, SMEs, right, and entrepreneurs. Some are early in the stage of development. Others could be more at an advanced stage. Working with government can be a challenge sometimes, especially when it comes to the payment plans that government has and policies. How have you navigated that, and how did you navigate the whole space? So what would be your advice to a founder?
I haven't navigated. Sometimes I've lucked out. Look, working with government has been hard. It's been tremendously hard. And look, there are things that maybe just out of political correctness, I just do not want to talk about on this particular session. But what I can tell over that, it has been that hard. Look, at the end of the day, you're always going to battle. Look, I think this is a question we have to ask ourselves about the system and the type of country that we run, that we are in, and how we hold government and our leaders accountable. I've been involved in particular projects where all of a sudden the rug has been pulled out from under you, and all of a sudden you hear that X and X have been given. Somehow that work has now been given to them, even though you were the most deserving. I've been through that. I've been through where ideas and solutions that you've given have been taken away, and all of a sudden there's a tender about the very same thing that you tried to push along. So I've had all of those frustrations. And I remember one of the things that I do talk about is, I don't want to do government work anymore, except now I've changed my mind. But the reason I've changed my mind is because we are going public, and now the way that I look at it is this is no longer my company. This is now everybody's company, and if, that makes me stronger overnight. So if I've got 2,000 shareholders and we are screwed out of something, we are going to test the limits of what it's like to be a public company, because I would tell my mob to say we are going to demand answers for not because whatever, but because we are deserving. So I certainly look forward to testing things like that out. But on the flip side as well, there's been very good experiences with government as well. Some of the work that has been done, there are ministers that I could rave about in the last administration, in this administration, that have been very supportive. I know they're very supportive to Bongo Hive as well, So it is a bit of a mixed batch, but I think what I could say to everyone in the room that we've been through it, waiting for payments that never come. We've been through that, and ultimately been told by lawyers that even if you sue government and win, your name will go somewhere at Minister of Finance, and maybe one day you will get paid. So look, it's not easy. There's no magic words that I could tell you to say this is how you can make it work. Every situation is unique. But I think the more experienced you get at doing these things, I think the better you become at stating, especially when you have a bit more leverage. I think today I can comfortably say I have a bit more leverage than perhaps the startup entrepreneur can do. There are things that I can offer that perhaps a startup entrepreneur can do, and I think that's just the life cycle. So I can go into negotiations and say, hey, look, we're going to put up a 5 million kwacha bond to do X and Y, or what, we're going to develop this and we can take on the sunk cost, and on success this is what we will do. So there are things like that I can enjoy. But I think one of the things that I'm looking forward to with the IPO, and not exactly this round, but I think in later rounds, is we're always complaining about how we're not participating. PPPs are always coming up. One of the reasons I am going public is I want to put that to the test. So if there's an opportunity, and I think, the work that you do would fall under a similar field. If there's work to be done and the cost around that is, let's say, 700 million kwacha, I want to be able to say, you know what, Boma, hold my beer. Let me go back to the capital markets because I've already been on the capital markets. So whether it's going and I'm going to do a bond for this project, these are the things that we are going to test. And I think as a Zambian company and a Zambian entrepreneur, I will demand that. Partly because, we talk a lot, but they're going to foreigners, we're going to what? And government is saying, but none of you are coming. So until I can actually get up, have a forum like this and told you I did this and this is why it didn't work, then there are grounds to say we've been hard done by. So I think, definitely in this next era, we're looking forward to putting things like that to the test.
Brilliant. One more thing I would like you to touch on, which is what you spoke about. You were knocking on doors, the Zambis, You mentioned Mr. Bota, Shoprite. Some entrepreneurs or people, generally Zambians, believe, hey, you need to have connections in order for you to make other connections. What would be your advice when it comes to that, especially for entrepreneurs?
No, I've had to do that twice on 2 continents. I remember when I joined Wall Street in the US. I remember the environment then. They were a bit uncertain about me. They were like, okay, let's give him a shot. But you know what? Secretly, he's the wrong color. He's the wrong age. People are not going to, he speaks weird. I think people are not going to take him seriously when it came down. But remember that rule: activity times frequency equals results. And I remember what I then did was, if anyone has worked investment sales or even sales now, is you're literally given a lead list. It's hundreds of pages. And all you have to do is they tell you, here you are, pick up the phone, start dialing. And you've got to call at least 40 people and make those sales. And I remember what I did. The first thing I did is I made sure that I knew my stuff inside and out. I was a broker, I was an advisor. I knew, what investments were doing what. I knew all the tax structures. I, first knew that I knew my stuff. The second was everything that they said was a disadvantage, I sort of turned into a branding advantage. I remember when I'd pick up the phone, I would be like, my name is Mo, so I didn't go by Mawano. But I'd go, hey, my name is Mo, and I'm calling you from XX. Oh, I can say the name. I'm calling you from Prudential Financial. And if you give me 30 seconds, I want to share with you one good idea, that you can share with your clients. And you'd go in and you'd pitch that idea. Now, the hardest thing for me during that time was I'm an introvert. I talking to people, so I'm in this environment and it was hard, and doing it 5 days a week, 7 days. And if you're doing field work, you've got to go and do 15 meetings. All people can say is no. And when they say no, to you, you just got to find a way to shake it off and keep going. So when we started to say, let's go and be, we can now start, let's go out and be an ETO manager. The same thing, I was put in the very same position. It was get up, go, and it was, who can I speak with? Who can I do ABC? You show up, who's in charge of transport? Who's in the accounting department? Do I need to talk to the CEO? Can you give me their number? And sometimes people would be hesitant, and people did say no to me. But ultimately, you just kept going. You kept going. And to be honest with you, after the encounter that I had in 2017, where we nearly went under, I'm like, no, I've got to eat. And so I remember there was a hunger that I had never had before. I mean, I was out there. It didn't matter. I was, Dola, I would show up at this door. When do you want me to come back? If I had to sit and wait for 3 hours for whoever was in charge, let them come and say no to me. And what I would say to everyone is, when you're thinking about sales, and I would urge everyone to, because if you're an entrepreneur, you have to sell. There's a topic called handling objections. An objection is, why does that person not want to give you business? And what you have to do is you have to think about, why will someone say no to me? Why will they not use my product? And you got to start practicing the counter. The better you are able to do that, the better your sales rate, your success rate at sales will go up. So that was it. It was just basically, you just get out there. People will say no to you, but if you say, I'm going to wait for my uncle to hook me up, then what? The worst is someone can say is no to you. That is it. You're not gonna die, hopefully, or you're not gonna fall over. You just get up and you move on to the next person.
It's hard to believe that you're an introvert. I bet you changed at some point. Entrepreneurship changed you, I guess.
No. I'm an introvert, but very well trained. I think that 1 year I did in sales was probably the best training I ever did. But probably brutal. And also, to make a happy story, because now we're public and we have to be transparent, my sales target when I was in the US, I think it was $14 million. That was the lowest in the country. Oh, wow. Think of the scope as this. The top sales guy in our company made $1 billion, could bring in $1 billion in sales. The money was so much that by law, they could not pay him an upfront commission. That's how it was. My target was a measly $14 million because they thought I couldn't do it. I remember that year I ended up making $30 million. I think I made about $180,000 that year. And believe me, I had nothing but poverty in the years prior to that. So, so when people say, I actually made my money on Wall Street. lost it being an entrepreneur in Zambia, and now it's sort of come back. But definitely did not do it I had to go the long route and the hard way. But I always tell people, and that's why when people are saying go out and be an entrepreneur, I say, please do not, it's coming across like an insult. You're not finding a job, go and be an entrepreneur. And I think you will know, and I think even the folks at Bongo Hive will know, being an entrepreneur is the hardest thing in the world, and sometimes I do get offended by the way we downplay it and the way we make it sound like anyone should do it because you can't find a job. No, let those that can do it, let them do it and let them hire. And if you are good, come and add value to my business. What if all my employees turn around and say, we want to be entrepreneurs? Then who would help me?
Makes sense. And so, Mawano, I'm feeling the drive. I'm feeling the passion. You love what you do, and especially with the drive. Not to take us back again, but I'm curious. Have you always had that drive, or where do you think you get it from?
No, I've always had it. And like I said, I think we're working a little bit of a mini bio press kit. And I think some of the things that will come out, some of the old documentation will pretty much show that, look, I think if you're a leader, if this is your personality, it's who you are. And I think one of the things that I look forward to sharing, especially as we begin moving into sort of the IPO phase, is to show the consistency in who I am and what I've been, what I've done, and how this started. And it's just ironic that certain things that I did that were documented, that were maybe featured in a newspaper back in, let's say, 1999, or 2001, they're there today just to show this was always the path that he was on. It's in him. It's kind of that old phrase of, are leaders born, are they made? And it's really a combination of both, because education and educating myself and making myself better and learning from when I've fallen is part of the journey.
Brilliant. Let's talk about the IPO.
And I will correct one thing. I'm only happy now just because of where I am, because I'm thinking about where I started out and how hard it's been and where I am now. Obviously, I'm extremely grateful for where we are now, what's gotten us. And I think I'm very reflective. Even when we think about sort of research and development and what we're going to do next, it's very different from how bus ticketing and whatnot began. Right now, we've got our own clients coming to us and saying, look, this is how we're thinking about problems that we have. Can you help solve them? That's a very different situation from back then. And because you have that relationship and because you have the resources, it's a very different environment. I think that's why you're seeing me very jovial like this. I think because, especially over the last couple of weeks, what we've done, where we've become, it still blows my mind how far we've come.
So not every entrepreneur has been lucky or fortunate enough to say, hey, all of my past projects have come together and formed this one big giant, right? And it's all rosy and great. How have you been able to let go even of ideas? For example, if something is not working, right? Because you've put in so much work, you're holding onto this. How have you been able to just move on from ideas and onto the next thing?
Great. Oh, no, that's actually a really good question. And I think I'll share some practical examples of that. So look, one of the reasons I wanted to move back to Zambia was opportunities are plenty here. There is so much opportunity in this country. It's ridiculous. And one of the reasons I say that is if you think about just any pain point, anything that frustrates you, anyone on this chat saying, this is what frustrates me, that in itself is an opportunity. I obviously talked about bus ticketing and whatnot. And that was sort of how that business sort of came about. That same rule still applies. Now, what you then have to do is you now have to put yourself and say, okay, is that problem a big enough opportunity? Can I make a business out of it? And one of the things you have to learn how to do very quickly, and this is why I love having a board, I love having advisors, because it's very easy to fall in love with your own idea. I've got this idea, and I know we've tested plenty of ideas. We've gone to board meetings and ideas for research and development have been shot down. I remember even one that I talk about, people right now have an issue with security. So I've looked at an idea of, hey, look, let's have an app and let's put a SIM card into like a key ring, and if you having an emergency, you're in trouble, click that button. It will alert Maybe your contacts on your phone, that you're in trouble and they should come help you. If you want the VIP package, click that same button. You're paying a monthly membership and rapid response and security will come to you. That could work in a household because you can literally now put transmitters onto something like a key ring. That's an idea. Remember, we discussed it, but it was shot down. One, it wasn't really within our core, not because the idea was, in there, but also what you have to do. And I see developers especially love to do this. They go out and they build and they say that I've got this idea, but they never consider what it actually takes to actually make a product work. They don't understand that there's the marketing aspect, the customer acquisition. You need a whole team to do that. Then they start to find that, oh my goodness, I just built this in the lab. I didn't even do any market research to ask if the customers wanted this solution, what they would be willing to pay. So I think what I could say is, unfortunately, we've moved away a little bit from the early days. Nowadays, ideas are vetted a lot harder. They have to go through, you write a business plan, you have to make a business case for it. You got to take it to a board meeting because we've got to look at our budget and say, how much of this are we going to allocate, for this particular idea? And what tends to happen is the ideas that win out are those that make the most business sense. So for us, even though we are, we're a technology company, right now our big business is the Ito business. So when we start thinking about what ideas should we be thinking about in R&D, it would make sense that they would be in the transport and logistics field, or at least related. Because who should we go to first when we say we've now got this is what we're thinking about, can we sell it to you, will you use it, can you test it? It's our existing customers that we already have a relationship with. So when we announce in the IPO that the next big project we're going to do is in the fuel industry, it would make sense. Those ideas tend to get traction a little bit more. Outside of that, we're going to go into what's called capital market. Look, I come from a capital market background, so part of knowing the rules of the game is once you do a successful IPO and your valuation starts to grow and your results start to look good, you then fall into this category of acquisition. The conversation will now become, we want this opportunity. That opportunity could be in Zambia. It could be in South Africa. We want to buy that business. This is why this business makes sense. How much money do we have to raise? $10 million. Let's go back to the capital markets. So I think for the people on this call, even doing an IPO for us, this was not something that was thought up or dreamed up. We just woke up and said, we're going to do an IPO. This was strategically aligned in the making. And even this initial IPO is sort of what we hope will be the first round of multiple rounds, but at bigger projects. And we could go from being sort of the small company that we are to the big company. So I think what you're seeing on what you've heard from us, and I think the big takeaway is the evolution of product development when you're a small and you're nimble and you could do it, to sort of when you become a bit more structured, now you're public, now you've got boards to report to. It does change the dynamics a little bit more.
Brilliant. For our audience, and I would like to get into the IPO. For our audience, it should have been around 2015, 2016, when the Lusaka Stock Exchange decided to set up the alternative market. And since then, we've never seen any SME or startup list on the alternative market, which is unfortunate, right? And for those that do not know, the goal was for SMEs to have another option, alternative for them to raise capital. And it's the restrictions there or requirements are different from the main board. But also even on the main board, the last IPO we saw should have been Zafico in 2020. Correct?
Yep. And then before that, we were talking about 2014 Madison. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the Zambia Forestry and Forest Corporation who listed last on. So the past 5 years, this year making 5 has been dry. So how are you feeling going into the alternative market? Because you will be, if this when the first Zambian startup. Yeah.
When you put it like that, I'm thinking, okay, either I'm smarter than everyone else, or I'm crazy. The fact that no one has done it. And look, the answer to why no one has done it is, no one knows the right answer. It could be, and even now there are questions around after we go, will the floodgates open? Will more people? Now, I know what will happen is after we do it, I think people will become aware that that is an option and there is a practical example that we can follow. So I think there is no doubt about that. But I think for me, for me, the IPO route always made sense. And I think I'll put it from this perspective. Remember, and people sometimes go to me and say, oh, but you come from an IPO world, you know how these things work. So maybe unlike the typical entrepreneur, you already knew how you wanted to make this work. And that would be a very valid argument. I think there are arguments around that. Look, and I think and I probably know why. Look, if you're going to be public, there are certain ways you have to run your business. I have good friends that run businesses, but the way they run it, they are not going public anyway anytime soon. Partly because a lot of them run the business like it's their, like it's their kingdom, their fiefdom. There's no separation between them and the business. They don't have basic governance structure. I remember employees would complain that if the boss today is annoyed that he doesn't want to pay us, he won't pay us. It's very, they don't intertwine themselves. The other issue as well is around tax avoidance. And believe me, you could start and get me talking about ZRA and I will complain until kingdom comes. One of the things that I am not happy about is that my tax liability this year to ZRA is 6.5 million, because I needed to know that if I'm going to go public, I need to show people that we can make a profit. But in making a profit, I now owe 6.5 million kwacha in income tax related, liabilities. And I know a lot of Zambians that say, I want to keep my things under the, the table. Also, if you're a foreign company, you're not going to list it, plus you have advantages of, different structures. So there are all sorts of reasons as to why, perhaps it hasn't happened. But for me, when I took the money from Kukula Capital back in 2015, in fact, this is a conversation for anyone that wants to raise money. And I think there are 2 points I will make to bring this home, and then maybe we can open it up. The first is when I took that money, there's a reason I used the title founder and managing director. The moment I took that money, I knew that it's not my company anymore. Okay. It now belongs to the investors, to the shareholders, and they will be represented by the board. Okay. And when they made the investment, even back in 2015, there were 3 ways they were going to get their return on investment. The first way is we would grow enough to be acquired by another company. Okay, that was it. IPO was also another way, but weirdly enough, it was not taken seriously at the time. Oh no, the idea is liquidity, whatnot, but it was there. It was literally, I could show you board meetings from 5 years ago. The option was there. The third option was you make enough money that through the dividends, you can pay an ROI back. And that was the conversation. As we went along, the IPO started to make a lot more sense. Now, here's why the IPO worked for me and why it might not work for others. When I started .com in 2009 formally, I owned 100% of the company. At some point, my shareholding moved to 92%. When Kukula and company came in, it moved down to 60%. Then it moved down to 46% when they reinvested and we had to restructure, down to 46%. When the IPO is over and said and done with, maybe I will own 30% of the company. Now, in all of those transactions, I made no money. I did not make any money out of it. All of that money went into growing the company. And so what would happen is the way to think about it is if you start a company and you've got 75 kwacha, you own 100% of 75 kwacha. If you now say, I want to raise 1 million kwacha, what you would do is you'd add 25 more shares. The investors would give you 1 million kwacha for those shares. It will go back into the business. At that point, what you now have 100 shares. I no longer, I still have my 75 shares, the original shares, but they're now 100 shares. I now own 75% of the company. Okay. And that's a concept we call dilution. Okay. Now, the reason we dilute is because I am a firm believer in I would rather own 10% of something big than 100% of something small. And I can tell every entrepreneur in this room to do it alone is hard. It is rock hard. Okay. And I am, so for me, right off the bat, that was something that I knew that if I want to grow to the levels that I am envisioning, this is the path that I would have to do. And I would have to give up certain things. The governance requirements I have to do. People get shocked when when I tell them that today 3 board members could gather up, say, Mawano, you are not performing, you are now fired. They can fire me. It's not my company. And now we're going public, that becomes even more of that. But I understood that from the very beginning, and I was okay with it. And I structured my plan, my vision around that very notion. Even the IPO, when we do the IPO, which I'm hoping will be next week, Monday and Tuesday, keeping our fingers crossed that we get our final regulatory approval. One of the things that the prospectus will be very clear about is that this is a retail IPO. So what I mean by that is usually when you're trying to raise money in the capital markets, you technically go to an underwriter or you go to an institutional investor like NAPSA. And yes, we've met NAPSA and whatnot, but NAPSA have more money than anyone put together. But when NAPSA give you the money, there's no more liquidity. They will buy it and they will hold that position. There are no more shares to buy. I said, let me do a retail, and there were a couple of reasons why I wanted to do a retail IPO. One was I want to be able to go back to my clients and say, this company that you've supported, become shareholders. The people sitting, listening to this, who are potential investors, I want them, because ultimately I want to be able to say, hey, look, I'm thinking about a new product in the fuel sector. When it comes out, you use it because it makes you wealthier. And you know what? Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. So it's what's called a multiplier effect. Give people a vested interest in that company. That's why you become public. So I understand why some people won't do it, but we have my own ideas as to why we went public, why it made sense for us, the type of IPO that we're trying to do. And that's how we found ourselves to sort of where we are. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about, and I think I hinted at this earlier, that I'm now a public company. We're applying for a tender. Hey, Chilenobombwe Council, better beware. We're applying, and they've actually put Zambian-owned. We're applying as a PLC. Yeah, if they don't, the way I will unleash my cadres of shareholders on them. But I joke about that stuff. But what I'm trying to emphasize is the dynamics. How are you going to compete with me? You're one individual. I own a company that's owned by thousands of shareholders that are Zambian. Okay. And we are well capitalized because we've gone to the capital markets. We're now more credible that I could call up any bank, any institution and say, I need to raise X amount. I did that. Everything I did was to make the company stronger. And if you're there sitting, I want to be the only one. I don't want to be fired. I only want people listening to what I do. If that works for you, great. But for me, I understood the rules of raising capital, what I needed to do, and I've done it.
This is such a brilliant story, Mawano, and I can keep on going and going, asking more questions.
I'm feeling bad because I'm seeing a lot of questions on the chat group.
Absolutely.
I think we've got to try and address some of them, and we will make, if you don't mind, we'll obviously make a little extra time because I want to be as helpful as I can to everyone. And when you see a lot of questions like that, it just means people want to know what's going on.
Absolutely. And so my last question, just in closing, so that we open it up for Q&A, I think Mariah will help us with that. Like you said, raising from Zambia, right? Since we're a small population, investors have their own ideas about, hey, you're a small country, we shouldn't be putting money there. Other investors, like we said, with an IPO, there hasn't been much activity on the stock exchange. They'll be like, hey, even our options for exit are limited. And entrepreneurs as well, they're like, hey, how do I build a company? What would be your biggest piece of advice to both investors and entrepreneurs that are looking to build the next company here in Zambia?
I wouldn't call it advice per se, but I think everything that you've described are real issues, both on the investor side and on the entrepreneurship side as well. Part of my rationale, because I think we're going to raise about 12, 13 million kwacha from this IPO, which is not a which is not a huge amount of money. And people who go through our financials will pick up on this. They're like, but you're doing 15 million kwacha in profit this year. And you're talking about 12. So surely you can call up the bank and they can give you 12 million. Absolutely, they can. So remember a lot of the reasons that I gave to why we're doing an IPO, sort of thinking about, you know, this is the initial IPO, but it will strengthen us for what we'll do down the road. All of that apply. But I think the way that I can answer your question is there is no answer to your question right now, because that's a debate both entrepreneurs and investors continue what we have. What I can then ultimately do is all you have to do is you have to reset the rules and reset the narrative. So even in my wanting to do this IPO, it's part of that conversation, you know, and I'm very fortunate that even, for example, with Kukula Capital, they've been very fortunate because they've invested in other SMEs, in other VCs. But if you go first, this will also change the perception. And I can guarantee the people in the room, like, I keep getting reminded of what a big deal this is, not because of .com itself, but if we do it well, what it will do down the road for others, because those same narratives that you just brought out, all of those will be cast aside. People will start saying, you know what, I can invest my money in Zambia because you know what, exits are possible. Look at what that company .com did from scratch. We are more willing. So it should have a multiplier effect. Even people themselves should start thinking about, you know, even this debate, mining, you know, in there. But what if someone says, you know what, I've got a good case here. I've done everything right. My governance is strong. Let me go to the capital markets. Let my fellow Zambians come in and invest. Let's invest in that mine. Let's invest in that energy project. Let's invest in that agriculture development. But that only happens when someone goes first. Then all of a sudden people are like, that's how it works. So it's not really answering your question, but what we're hoping for, and this is what I hope will happen, is when we do it, the dominoes will fall a little bit as well. And it will just become easier for everyone that follows suit, whether it's investors. And what I hope really is the big investors, you know, earlier in the year when we were talking to the institutional investors, they would do our valuation and their response would be, how much money are you raising? 13 million kwacha only. You're too small, you know? But I always say, when's the best time to invest in a company, especially a tech? You know, it's now. So one of the things that I hope is, you know, to be able to go back, you know, in the near future to those big guys and say, hey, remember that time when we're only worth this amount? Now we're coming and now we need to raise $50 million because our valuation is $500,000. You know, I hope to have that conversation because that will teach them at Muilatu Sula. You know, that's my only thing. Even the people on this court don't, because they have. But we, you know, someone's got to show them what you do.
And I believe you get there, Mawano. And thank you so much for this insightful conversation, and congratulations on the progress that you guys have made at .Com Zambia. Really proud of the achievements and wishing you well. At this stage, I'll just pass it on to Mariah to just take us through the Q&A so that others can participate in the conversation as well.
Thank you so much, Kawela. I'm going to start with the chat, opening up from Peter Nawa. He's saying, looking at the .com Zambia, the journey ahead, full presentation figures, your cost of sales are relatively high. The assumption is that tech companies would have a low COS. What does COS look like for .com Zambia?
Okay.
So that's the first question.
Okay, sure. Do you want me to answer? Okay, let me do that one very quickly. So in financial accounting, what you have is you have your sales, and then you take away your cost of sales, and then you come up with your gross profit. We are a financial technology company, and what Peter's referring to is actually more just about understanding the industry, not a structure of .com per se. Financial technology companies in particular will always have very high numbers, and then they work off very low margins. So off those, you know, so when we say we made, you know, we're going to make 630 million, you know, our cost of sales is 96% because we're simply making anywhere from, 2% to 4% off the revenue that we are generating. But it also depends on the type of the business line that you are doing as well. So when we look at our future growth, it's a combination of both what we call processing like transactions. A good example of that would be how we're thinking about the fuel sector. We want to do 1 billion kwacha in fuel sales over 3 years. The cost of sales on fuel is going to be about 99%, 98%, because it's a low margin product. So we already know that. And so our goal is to make sure that the volume of transactions we are processing are super high. But we also have what we call proprietary products that carry a bit of a different revenue model. So for example, if I charge a company a licensing fee of, let's say, $10,000 a year to use a particular system that we have built, that immediately, there is no cost of sales with a product like that. It immediately gets pushed into our gross profit. So a lot of it is just understanding the type of how technology companies run. You're going to see similar things with banks, with mobile money. It's just the nature of the industry. Whereas manufacturing may have a different model around cost of sales, retail would have a different. Consultancy, a law firm, has almost no cost of sales. So it's just knowing the type of business. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that. People in the chat are really happy with some of the things that you've said. I have Martin who said, I love the pivoting part. That was a genius move. E-commerce to bus ticketing to tolling. It really took 2 major pivots before finding the perfect niche and finally IPO. Got all the love for this guy. #Kambeu. So that was for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, and somebody also touched on the cold calling and how it's actually a very hard skill, but a necessary skill to have as an entrepreneur, obviously. And people, we have Kapeso, who is asking, your financial projections for the coming years sound amazing. How are you going to ensure that they're met when we factor in the unpredictability of a business cycle?
Okay.
Yes.
No, good question. Look, I think where we are now as an organization, we're always thinking about risk. We're always thinking about business cycles. We like to think, especially I think on the tolling side, that we are this is going to be a business that we will continue to dominate for the years to come, partly because we've already attained first mover advantage. But one of the reasons you're hearing about, sort of our business plan and our outlook, and we talk about, the different levers we're going to pull. Yes, we are going to work on electronic tolling. We are going to work on sort of some of the intellectual property that we've been working on to build that out. We are working on entering the fuel space as well. And I think part of that is just to ensure that we have a little bit of diversification in terms of what we do. And that is one way that you can factor around unpredictability of business cycles. But as you said, it's unpredictable, so you never quite know how it would go down. But we will say we do think about risk and planning and long-term outlook a lot in our planning sessions and our strategy sessions with the board.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take the last 2 questions since we are over time. Let's see. We have Gerald who is saying this was a masterclass, Kambeu, and get your flowers. 12 to 13 million capital raised from the first round IPO. How much ownership do you anticipate this account? And someone is also asking how they can invest using a broker.
Okay. Let me clarify what's going to happen, because apparently we're finding that a lot of people don't actually know how IPOs work. All right. So what's going to happen is one of 2 things. All right. So when you do an IPO, that's actually called an initial public offering. So what will happen is hopefully next week when we announce, we are now going to say our IPO is now authorized. We are now taking applications. And applications are actually done through what's called the listing broker. In our case, it's Kukula Capital. So what you're going to do is you are going to apply for the shares. You're going to read the prospectus. It's going to have all the details. It's even going to talk about how we're thinking about the risk and all our financials and all our outlooks. When you look at the prospectus and you then decide, I would like to go ahead and invest, we're actually doing something a little bit different from how traditional IPOs are done. Most IPOs are done with Zanaco, You know, the branch network, you fill out a paper application, you then take your money and you take it to Zanaco, and that's how you apply for an IPO. Ours is actually going to be 100% digital. So it's going to be done with FNB. You deposit there, you go to our website, the application is going to be there, you're going to fill it out. You are then going to apply for the shares. Okay? Now, with an IPO, you sometimes might be oversubscribed or undersubscribed if there is demand. If people really want to own a piece of our company, what will ultimately happen is we will end up being oversubscribed. Now, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this. They've changed the rules of our IPO a little bit. All right. So typically what happens in an IPO, and I think the best example I could give is what happens with the treasury auction. You're always hearing that Bank of Zambia want to offload 200 million kwacha in treasury bills. They ended up getting 400 million in applications. They were oversubscribed by 2. So what happens in a situation like that is they accept 200 million kwachas worth of applications, and then they refund everyone else. So what was supposed to happen in our case is we could say we're taking applications. People are applying, they're making the deposits. We then go back, and if let's say there is 20 million kwachas worth of applications, we will say, here are the approved applications. The remaining 8 million kwacha that makes up 20 million, we have to refund back to everyone. And we can say we were oversubscribed by ×2. They've changed it for us a little bit. They're now saying that once our IPO is oversubscribed, we have to close the IPO. So even if the application window is 4 weeks, if in 1 week we raise that 12, 13 million kwacha, the IPO is then done. That is, yeah, and there are reasons why we've been given that particular guidance. So that is typically how an IPO will work. If you do not participate in an IPO, the next participation you can do is now on the stock exchange. You then contact a broker. You then say, I would like to buy shares of Dot Com Zambia. They're trading at this price. Go ahead and please make a bid, and I hope someone that has the shares will sell them to me. And that is typically how it would work. So I think I've made a very long-winded explanation, but what I'm effectively saying is that the IPO process, you apply from the broker who is issuing the new shares. Okay. If you don't get them there, you then get them on the secondary market, which is when they begin trading on the stock exchange. So I hope that answers the very important question. Just thought I would at least tackle that, because we're getting quite a lot of confusion around how IPO. So technically, you don't contact your broker for the IPO. You just apply directly to Kukula. If you want to buy them on the stock market, then you contact a broker.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification as well. Looking at the time, it is 1940, so we are 10 minutes over time, but I wish we could go on and on.
Yeah, for everyone, look, when we announce the IPO, we have to do what are called road shows. This is where we have to come and speak to all of you as potential investors. That is where we can tackle questions like the ones that have come up, because that question we get a lot, you know, what's our revenue structure? What's our future outlook? All of those will be done during the roadshow. Some of these roadshows will be physical. I think we'll have to make stops in, and that's part of doing an IPO. You got to go out and talk to the investors and to the public. I think we're doing stuff in Lusaka, Kitwe, Ndola, Solwezi. I know there's some international dates. They might not happen. We're going to do online dates as well. That is where you as potential investors have to come in and say, this is my question. I've looked through the prospectus. I've looked through your numbers. What's your take on this? And all of that will happen in the days ahead.
Okay, that's excellent. We do look forward to those.
Yeah, I can see all the questions, and they're all very IPO related. Please do not get me in trouble with the regulators. We are going to do virtual roadshows, and we can definitely dive into the details when the time comes. The only thing I would say is, as soon as you hear that the IPO is out, we obviously have to announce it in the newspapers, online. Just pick up the prospectus, read it, and go from there.
Okay, that's perfect. I've actually left my email in the chat as well, so I can see that the questions are still coming. So if anybody does have any other questions that they would like to have, they would like to ask, sorry, I can compile them and then I can share them with you, Mawano, and then we can just help tackle some of the issues that our audience may still have.
Okay, no problem.
Yes, I don't know at this point if you have any last inspirational words for our audience before we drop off.
I don't know about inspirational words, but I think when I'm looking at the level of participation, I think the level of gratitude, I think this validates what it is we're trying to do. Part of why I wanted to do the IPO, part of why I do some of the things that I do is to just make it, I know how hard it is. And I did not get here, and I got here because certain people were willing to take a chance on me. People were willing to open doors for me, and I've got to pass it on. So if I can make it easier for the next person and the person behind that, just very similar to what Bongo Hive does as well. If you make it easier for the next group of entrepreneurs coming up, then I think we can sleep easier at night, and we will certainly do that. And so looking at the questions, I'm actually a little bit overwhelmed by the level of engagement. I love the questions around because it means people have a genuine interest in knowing, and look, even what Kabe was writing there is, how can you be confident in my word? Do not be confident about my word. Me, I'm a sweet talker, Kapeso. That is why you have to look at the prospectus and make your own judgment. All that I can say is I am here because people believed in me. I have a vision in terms of what I want to do. All you can do is look at the material, say that, you know what, at the end of the day, evaluating everything, I actually do believe in him. I believe in the company. I want to go ahead and do it. And that's perfectly fine. And if not, I perfectly understand. Hopefully you'll not be one of the people doing for more and saying, I should have, but at the end of the day, I cannot guarantee what our outcome will be. But I think all I can do is just give my assurances that this is something that I am going to put everything, all of my energy into to make happen, just so that it can make a difference. And I really appreciate everyone taking the time to jump on the court, to listen to me, to be engaged. It's very humbling, and I thank all of you. And I think really no motivational words, just really a thank you, and really thank you to you, to really the both of you in the preparation that has come in making this happen, and the back and forth and getting me on board. Even though the joke that I will leave with is everyone has been picking up on the community that this man has been absent from public engagements for years. Now he's doing an IPO, he's out, and but I'm glad. I think it's amazing what we're doing, and I'm glad you gave me the platform to come out and share what we've learned, and I hope people took a lot out of this.
Thank you so much for your words, and this has really been an incredible session. I'd also like to thank Kawela. Thank you so much for guiding us through the conversation as well, and really getting to the heart of the story. And your passion has been really inspiring as well, and it's very infectious. And I think it's very important. It's a very important aspect to have if you're an entrepreneur. Be passionate about what you do, even if you get a no. How are you going to come back until you finally get that yes? So that's one of the major takeaways that I've gotten from your session this evening. Just for the audience, this is actually our final community webinar for this year. So this is actually a great way to end the year as well. And congratulations on the IPO as well. I don't think I mentioned that. This is very
Thank you, Mariah. Thank you, Kabela. No, I'm very psyched. Look, when people ask me, I can't even hide. People are like, oh, are you being forced? Even no. It's just an amazing achievement. I think it will do a lot of good. And I just love what we can do the next phase of our business cycle, and the next chapter of our business journey.
Okay, thank you so much. Some people are asking if this session is recorded. This was actually live on our Facebook and YouTube page. So if you did miss out anything that Mawano was talking about, you'll be able to go to our socials. So that's Bongo Hive on Facebook. On YouTube, we can also find us on Twitter as well as LinkedIn, and you'll be able to find the recording and also find out what's happening at the Hive. So at this point in time, I'd like to thank everybody once again for joining the session. Thank you, Mawano. Thank you, Kawela. Yes, and we can bring this session to a close.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will be leaving my email in the chat just in case you missed it. So feel free to email me any questions that we may not have tackled in this session. Otherwise, good news. Thank you so much.